All right, today we're going to get into a really powerful idea from our source material. It's called the architecture of measure. So let's jump right in. Does this sound familiar to you? That feeling of always having to do more, say more, move faster? It's this nonstop hustle, right? It almost feels like that's the only gear we have these days. But, the source material stops and asks a pretty profound question. With all that frantic energy, all that incredible speed, where are we actually headed?
And that question, well, it leads us straight into our first big idea here, what the text calls the trap of more. Turns out, this whole obsession with speed, it's a one-way ticket to complete exhaustion.
And here's the thing, it's a trap for a reason. At first, all that excess, just blowing past limits, it feels amazing. It feels like power. It's thrilling, almost intoxicating. And you think, wow, I'm really getting somewhere.
But then, there's the crash. The source is crystal clear on this. All that speed, without some kind of guiding principle, without measure, it doesn't actually get you where you want to go. Nope, it just runs you right into the ground. We're talking about total burnout.
Okay, so if more is the trap, how do we get out? Well, that brings us to the solution. Let's dig into finding your center and figure out what this whole measure thing is really all about.
This is what I find so fascinating. Measure sounds like it's about limitation, right? Like holding back. But it's not. It's the exact opposite. It's a protective force. Think of it like a center of gravity that keeps you from just scattering into a million pieces.
And look at what's at stake here. When you lose that center, everything gets twisted. Freedom, without that anchor, it just turns into aimless drifting. And discipline, that becomes this cold, rigid harshness. It's a total corruption of good things.
I love this quote from the text. It's just so perfect. Excess grants speed, but measure shows the way. So yeah, speed gets you going fast, but measure tells you where to go. And then speed tires, measure carries. It's like the difference between a frantic sprint that leaves you breathless and a steady current that just carries you along.
Okay, so that's the big idea. But how does this actually play out in real life? Let's bring it home and talk about our inner compass. Yep, how measure works in our relationship with ourselves. So on one end of the spectrum, the source points to the person who is just way too harsh with themselves. You know the type, right? Their own worst critic. Absolutely no room for error, can't forgive a single mistake. It's relentless. And then you've got the total opposite. The person who is completely boundless with themselves. No limits. Every single impulse, every desire is treated as something that absolutely has to be acted on. No breaks. So what's the middle path? The source calls it refinement. And the key takeaway here is that it's not about beating yourself up, and it's not about letting yourself go completely wild either. It's something much deeper. It's about knowing yourself, really knowing your strengths, your limits, and just operating from that real, honest place. And of course, that inner balance has to show up somewhere, right? It spills out into everything we do. So let's talk about the rhythm of life, how this idea of measure pops up in our day-to-day choices. This is where it gets super practical. See, measure isn't some big, lofty, philosophical thing. It's in the small stuff. It's knowing how much to talk and when to just be quiet. It's knowing how much to work and knowing when to call it a day and stop. And what happens when we lose that rhythm? Well, according to the source, we get stuck in one of two awful places. We're either spinning our wheels, constantly hurried and stressed out, or we're completely stuck in the mud, totally stagnant.
All right, let's zoom out one last time. From the personal to the social, let's look at the power of place and see how measure plays out in society.
This is a fantastic way to see it. Think about it. A healthy society needs rules, right? But if those rules get too hard, they're just oppressive. If they disappear, it's total chaos. Same with tone. You need some seriousness, some gravity. But without humor, everything's just gloomy. A measured society knows how to hold these two sides in a healthy, productive tension. Okay, pay attention, because this might be the most important takeaway of the whole thing. So often we hear measured, and we think mediocre. We think boring, average. The source says, no way. That's a huge misunderstanding. Measure isn't about being average. It's about being in your rightful place, the spot where you are uniquely you and uniquely effective.
So, a measured person isn't some wallflower you don't even notice. It's the opposite. They're the person you can actually count on, the one who has your back. They're reliable. They're trustworthy. That's a superpower, not a weakness.
So, let's wrap this all up. What's the bottom line?
When we lose that center, when we lose measure, life doesn't just stop. It scatters. It falls apart into a million little pieces.
But when we find it, when we find that measure, life doesn't get smaller or more boring. It gets richer. It gains weight, substance, meaning. Life deepens.
And that leaves us with one final thought, a question to take with you. If measure is what creates and protects that depth, then how are you going to protect yours?